Also joining the show tonight, the man that crunches numbers, creator of Hansen's Ratings, and knower of D3 football. It's Logan Hansen. What's up, man?
Not too much. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm excited to get you on here. Like I told you before we got going, been following along with everything you do and you contribute to the D3 football landscape. So to take that conversation off of the X or Twitter timeline, whoever you align yourself with, and bring it onto the podcast format, I personally am very excited about. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. I'm happy to talk about Division III football with anybody who loves Division III football.
Hell yeah. That's good. That's good. And it seems to be that there's a growing amount of us. At least this has been my impression of the last one, ever since I kind of stepped into this this game and getting more word out there. And that I think is in large part to the stuff that you and many other people do and getting these pieces out there and helping people to just get their foot in the door. Because I think that's the biggest part, right? You're just getting people to be interested. And then once you get them in, it becomes this deal of that they're reoccurring fans and they come out and they show support. But getting them, I think, at least in my perspective, getting that foot in the door is probably the toughest part.
Yeah, I'd agree. It does seem like there's more people covering it. Like when I was a player, so I played 2008 to 2011 at Wartburg, it was just d3football.com. And other than that, there was nowhere else to go to look for stuff. There were like Massey Ratings was still turning to look at like the statistical side of things, but now you've got in the D3 football huddle, they operate out of the East Coast, and they used to just be like one conference, and now they cover it nationally. Yourself, there've been, I mean, I feel weird saying this, but I've been like doing my ratings and posting them online for almost a decade now.
Yeah.
There've been other companies that I've seen like try to get into it, but when it's somebody that's not like passionate about it, people who are can tell, and then it fizzles out after like a year or two. But yeah, I'm glad to see more people finding out about D3 football, getting into it, and covering it from a media side, especially like what you did at lacrosse this year, that game day out there. That was really cool to see. I'll be honest, I didn't get to watch it. I was at a Wartburg game, I think, that weekend. I'm usually at a football game on Saturdays, so that's how I spend my weekends.
I appreciate that. And we're looking to hopefully do some more of those this year, albeit probably not until the playoffs, just because of my schedule and the other schedules of the guys who helped me out. But that was a blast. I think you're spot on in the fact that, if somebody does try and enter this space and they're maybe not totally bought in or totally passionate about what this is, that's going to fizzle out very quickly. And I know that's something where myself and my podcast, I've gone through breaks. Started this thing in 2020 in my dorm room, and we've gone through a lot of different phases, and now we seem to be finally in this good rhythm where, myself and everyone I know is like Monday is podcast night. Like that's where we sit down. It's engraved in the schedule, and I'm all about it. And I'm lucky to be able to talk with guys like you, but let's talk about you and your kind of your journey to getting here. You talked about it. This is not, you didn't just burst onto the scene in the last couple of years doing this, something you've been passionate about. You've been putting a lot of time and effort into these different algorithms and models we'll talk about. But what is it? Obviously, you've been in the D3 football world. You talk about playing and being around it in that capacity. What is it that got you so interested in doing the more statistical, mathematical side of the deal and starting to create these models and distribute them as well?
So as a player, it was the Iowa Conference. Now it's called the American Rivers Conference. And, our coaches hammered it in our heads, like between Wisconsin Conference, Minnesota Conference, Iowa Conference, like this is, the heart of Division III football. You play in a premier football league. And then I went and I GA'd at UW-Platteville in the WEAC, and the D3football.com website would always do once or twice a year conference rankings, and I'd always see the Iowa Conference at like number 10, like kind of upper middle third, and I'm like, man, those guys they're full of it. I know more than they do. So, and then I filling out like an NCAA basketball bracket once, I found Ken Pomeroy and his rankings, and I said, somebody should do this for Division III football. So I started by just doing that, and I had like a WordPress site back in 2013 that I was posting on that I probably got like 2 page views total, and then I just kept doing it and kept trying to make it better. And I think really the reason that I think it started catching on with people and people started giving me some credibility was because they knew that this model is just for Division III football. Like, you go to Massey Ratings, or Sagarin used to have it for Division III, and all these other power ratings online. They're all calibrated for FBS because that's what people think of when they think of
Of
college football.
course. Yeah, of
Um,
course.
Division III is just so much different than FBS football, and the way that teams stay good or get good, and um, the recruiting, everything is just so different. So having a model that's really focused on just being good at predicting Division III football is really what I focused
I love that. And I think today that's probably more evident than ever, just the way that college athletics and the football landscape in particular has transformed throughout the last decade, of which you've started this and continued to grow this. What are some of those things, if you could pinpoint them, that separate, at least from that standpoint of creating these models and doing some of these predictive deals, that separate? Because on the outside, the differences are obvious, but when you talk about creating something that's going to try and predict and calculate, what are some of those things that maybe separate the FBS models from something that you're very familiar with at a D3 level?
Right. So I'd say the recruiting, and then how much data you can get on a team in a season. So in Division III, there's just fewer games. There are fewer games than Division II, fewer games than NAIA, fewer games than FCS, FBS. And you're not going to get as much geographic crossover. And then you're also going to get less conference crossover. There's more conferences now ever since the NCAA changed the rule on how big your conference could be and still get an AQ. So now there's 29 conferences. Used to be only about 25 every year, 26. So teams had fewer non-conference games. So when you're trying to build an algorithm to rank teams, and say the American Southwest Conference down in Texas, there was a year that conference had 10 teams. So they have one non-conference game. And it's hard for them to schedule other Division IIIs, being where they're at geographically.
Absolutely.
The whole conference played 3 or 4 non-conference games against other Division III teams. So if you're doing a model like what most people do for Division I FBS, and you just, overfit it, solve it based on, all the data that we have is everything we need to know for this season, and that's the truth about how good these teams are. You're basing how good that conference is relative to the rest of the country just based on 3 games.
Yeah.
So that's not going to be a very good model. So my model has every single game that's been played since 1997 informing teams' ratings. And it's really like the last 5 games that a team plays is about half of their current rating. And then, so that's their half-life.
Okay.
And then, so about 75% of the current ratings are based on, like by the end of the year, are based on that year's results. 25% are based on everything they've done since 1997.
Okay. There you go. No, that makes a lot of sense. When you explain it, that does. It makes a lot of sense. And, you have, I believe it's on your pinned tweet, actually. I went through and read at least a little bit of it, of more of the actual reasoning and explanation behind what goes into that model and those pieces. And I'll admit I did not read the entire piece. I'll be the first one to tell you that.
I think I knew it was going to be long when I started it, but I don't even remember I was on vacation with my family. We were down in Florida, and I knew that I was going to have downtimes when everybody else in the family was taking a nap. So I'm like, all right, I got a week where I'm going to have an hour and a half every day to myself. And I'm like, all right, let's hammer this out and just get into the nitty gritty detail. If you got to the bottom, it said, hey, congrats if you made it this far. You're a complete psycho.
Yes. And scrolling through it for the people, I mean, just watching those who watch us on YouTube, like, I think they'll get a sense immediately of like, yeah, this is something that for someone who maybe stumbles across you and your platforms, to at least, I would assume in a sense, give you some kind of credibility for those who do read through this and say that this guy's not just plugging in numbers to something he found, some model he found on the internet. Like, this is something that he has crafted and meticulously put a lot of this effort into and really just innovated in a lot of areas. has that credibility in a sense that you talked about Kempom earlier. And when you look at
Mhm.
that model, and people reference it every single year because it
Yeah.
becomes so accurate, and the things, the different qualifiers and the different pieces and variables that go into that, they end up being the defining traits of a lot of teams that go on to Elite Eights, Final Fours, national championship runs, those kind of things. In those years where you're still kind of creating and fine-tuning a lot of these models and deals, did that credibility, I would assume, came with a lot of success in your models? Is that kind of how it worked? Is when your models correlated very correctly, people started taking maybe a little more serious?
Kind of, yeah. So the first 3 years that I really started, I created a Twitter account and I was posting game scores online for every single game. So this would have been probably like 2015 to 2017. I found every single computer rating that I could that had predictions for Division III football.
Okay.
And I tracked like the. Have you ever heard of the
Yep.
predictiontracker.com?
Yep.
Yeah, so I did what they do, but I did it for just Division III. And the first year, my model did all right, but then like the next 2 years, I was pretty consistently either the number one or number two model. The other one that was really good isn't around anymore. Atomic Ratings. They
Interesting.
are
Okay.
based out of, I think some guy from Alabama was doing it, and that was a really good model. But then the other thing too is like if you just take them all and you average them together, that was better than any one model. But
Yeah.
I'll also, a little correction. I don't think I'm innovating on any of this stuff because
Okay.
this is like what I do in my spare time. I read what other people are doing, like Bill Connolly for ESPN,
Yep.
another guy that
Of course.
I've actually bounced ideas off of him on Twitter a few times, and um, like reading about how does ESPN do their football power index, like
Almost
so. I
aggregating in a sense, I guess.
hmm Yeah, so I'm taking all the ideas that I think could work for Division III, but instead of just copy pasting what they did for college basketball or FBS football, I'm like, okay, how can I make this idea specific to Division III?
Yeah, tailor it for you, like you talked about your niche and that kind of deal, which is really neat. And that way of thinking maybe doesn't always sit well with everyone because emotions are a big part of this game, and I can certainly appreciate that. Such was the case. You released the 2024 those preseason rankings with
Yeah.
every single Division III football team, and seemed to get a good variety of responses there. Talk about, I guess, specifically with this model, this predictive model, what goes into those calculations, how obviously you ultimately get this final culmination, this list.
Yep. So you take a just kind of like a weighted average of the last, I do 5 years. And about 80% of that is going to be how you finished the year before. And then the
Okay.
other 20% is an average of the previous 4 years. And then that's the bulk of it. And then from there, I tweak it up and down based on, is your head coach returning? Is how many returning starters do you have? How many returning passing yards, passing attempts, rushing yards, rushing attempts, and then all the defensive statistics. That is still in flux, just because I'm not going to know who's on teams' final rosters until like a week before the
Yeah.
games start.
And that goes back to you talked about getting information on these teams. And I
Mhm.
know it, I think, as well as most, that finding information on players, coaches, other people involved with Division III football and lower level football in general, that can be a hassle.
Oh yeah, it's brutal. So like the stats.ncaa.org, that's where I get most of my stuff because that's at least all in one place.
Yep.
But when I do have to go to like a team's website, you got probably for some schools one SID at the smaller schools, and then other ones that are going to have the SID and then like one student assistant, and they've got 19 sports to cover. So
Yep.
there's going to be some things slipping through the cracks, but um, they do a great job for the most part. The thing that gets me is sometimes when it's like, okay, your NCAA roster, this guy is T.J, and then on your school's website, he's TJ, no periods. And then I'm trying to do my data stuff, and those guys don't match up, and that's frustrating. But what
Trust
you
me,
gonna do?
I've been there, done that. I work very closely with our SIDs up here at Northern, and I can tell you, like, talk about a thankless gig, first of all,
Hmm.
right? And just the behind the scenes people that that make a lot of stuff happen for small school athletics. And if it weren't for them, we would have just about nothing. Because like you said, that they are basically the main point of contact, whether we know it or not, of where we get the variety of our information, whether it is those game day stats and those other kind of information, articles, releases, the things that I always try and research before we get people on here. But staying on the thought of those predictive models, you talk about these
Hmm.
lines, these theoretical lines that you put on the 2024 schedule for a lot of these teams. And I know
Yeah.
one that at least caught my eye for sure was this one on the Cortland Dragons, right? Talking about how not just favored, how highly favored they would be in this 2024 season using your model. And I know, again, talking for someone from an outside perspective, and I saw people say this, and I certainly understand where they're coming from. After a year where, yes, they experience a ton of success, they go and win the national championship, they lose a good deal, and a good deal being their two top pass catchers, both finding NFL opportunities, which is fantastic in its own right. Even with
Hmm.
all of that being the case, you bring back a just big time accolade receiving head coach, obviously one of the best, at least in my opinion, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, the way Zach has performed. Talk about this model and I guess more specifically what goes into this and some of those lines on the game specific basis.
Right. So for each game, it's the line is just home field advantage, and then whatever one team's rating is minus the other.
There you
So
go.
that like the actually predicting the lines, that's super easy. It like the
Interesting.
complicated part is making the preseason ratings.
Okay.
So the like looking at Portland specifically for the preseason ratings, they did not finish last year as my number one.
Yeah.
North Central did. I mean, if you look at the full season and not just like the last 3 weeks, which the last 3 weeks Cortland was playing better ball than North Central was.
Yep.
But for the previous 12 games, North Central was just an absolute monster. So I actually thought when I posted that and my ratings had North Central, then Whitewater, then Portland, I'm like, oh man, people are going to be upset with me that Portland's so low and that
Yep.
these lines are too close. And then I got more pushback for the lines being too big. Like
Wow.
people that are fans of like especially Susquehanna, because I mean they beat them last year,
Yes.
crazy fourth quarter comeback.
Of course.
But if I take away that fourth quarter from what Portland did last year and use that as like this is how good they are, ignore that one quarter. That one quarter is an aberration. This prediction for this next year is a step back. Like receiving production is the biggest part of the returning production formula for what I do on offense, at least. So,
Interesting.
like losing those two guys is a big hit. But you can also look at there's one game last year that Burgess did not play.
Yep.
And that was until the playoffs. That was their best performance all year in the regular season.
Okay.
So, like,
Interesting.
there's a lot of like game to game, teams are not the exact same team every single week. If they were, either Susquehanna would have won the national title or Cortland wouldn't have. Right? Like upsets happen. Teams play better some weeks, they play worse. I mean, especially like you go talk to coaches, they're going to be like, man, week of finals every single year, and our kids are just out of it. Especially if it's a school that does like trimesters instead of semesters. They're like,
Yes.
that trimester finals week, our you go look at our record, we're terrible that week. So teams play better, they play worse. This is like a model like what I do. It says this is the average of how good you're going to play. Some weeks better, some weeks worse. So
Yeah. I mean, you talk about Susquehanna. They go on. They beat the what would be the eventual national champion, and then go on to have their hearts broken against Grove
yeah.
City, and then even just continuing on that side of the bracket, they're a kick away from sending Cortland back. And there's all these different deals, man, and these different levels.
Endicott had a pass sail
Yep.
over the receiver's head in the end zone like
There you
that.
go.
So there's 5 plays in 5 different games you could pick out for Cortland and say any one of these plays goes the other way, they're not national champs.
Yeah.
So there's so much crazy stuff that can happen in a football game that like I know I'm putting these not lines out, and on average I'm going to miss by about 2 touchdowns on
Yeah.
every single one of these. But I still have some coaches, they'll like send me a DM on Twitter after the game, and they'll be like, man, I thought we thought we had a better shot than you gave us, but no, you were pretty spot on.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. You do get messages like that sometime, like, I
Oh
hate to
yeah,
say this,
there's
but
a couple
you were right there.
coaching staffs. Yeah, there's a couple coaching staffs that they'll send me messages about 5, 6 times a year. And I'm not going to say who it is, but it is kind of funny to get their perspective on what they think, and then how they feel after the games happen too.
Yeah. It's very different. Yeah, looking at that, forward thinking and then in retrospect and going back and kind of reflecting on that is from a coach perspective very different. But
Mhm.
sticking on those, those models, and it feels like with any kind of ratings, schedules, those kind of deals, your models, and rightfully so, put a lot of emphasis on the conference strength of the conference, and
Mhm.
kind of that competition is a big indicator of that. And as such, the WAC always seems to be at a top of a lot of those. Like I said, deservingly so. What is
Yeah.
it about that league that makes it so elite? Is it what they do out of conference in the playoffs? Something else? Is there anything about that league that really, because everyone knows like that is, as far as just conference play goes, that is the cream of the crop. There's so many top dogs in that conference. So what is it in your models that really sets them ahead if there's one piece or a couple of them?
So like in terms of the model, it's all based on how good they play when they're playing teams outside of their conference.
Okay,
So
out of
like
conference, yep.
that, yeah, the out of conference play is what makes them good in the ratings. But what makes them actually good at football, having coached in the league and then lived in Wisconsin for a few years, there's no bad teams. Like you can look at the teams who were at the bottom of the conference last year, Eau Claire and Stevens Point. They've got just as much administrative support from their AD and the college chancellor as every other school in that conference. Eau Claire just built this outstanding new facility out there,
Oh yeah, we know all about
and
that.
and I pretty much every single team in that conference has won a playoff game in the last 2 decades. There is no other conference that you can go top to bottom and say every single team here has won a game in the postseason in the last 2 decades. Like the kids on this team, 19 to 22-year-olds, every single kid was alive the last time this team won a postseason game,
Yeah.
and that is not the case in most conferences. There's just so much variability between how much funding the football programs are getting and how much support they're getting from their administration. Like just being able to fund enough coaches to go out and recruit,
Yep.
and that's not something that they got to worry about in the Wisconsin conference.
I hear you. And I know a big piece of that too is you talk about the football landscape in Wisconsin. You've got the WAC, which is so prominent. You
Mm-hmm.
have Madison, and then what else, right? You talk about kids wanting to
Right.
stay home. You don't have that presence. You look at, I'm a Michigan
You
guy. I
got the
grew up in.
NSIC coming in and poaching kids, and then
Yep.
that's about it.
That's yeah, really. And now you have schools like Northern Michigan is a great example of trying to get down. We brought
Mm-hmm.
in a ton of kids from the Wisconsin area, but obviously have not performed very well against those squads in recent years. But you look at a state like Michigan, which is very much the opposite. You have everything from, I believe we even have a JUCO now for a very prominent D3 presence with the MIAA. You go up to the NAI level, you have the MFSA, I believe. And you go
Mm-hmm.
D2 in the GLIAC. You've got the group of 5 with the MAC, the FBS, and there's all these different
Yeah.
levels. It's so overly saturated, and to see that other contrast side of that in Wisconsin, you're left with a lot of kids who want to stay relatively close to home and play high caliber football, but it just doesn't have that Division II or Division I tag on it because they're just not big
Yeah.
enough, not strong enough to play at Madison.
We had all Americans just fall into our lap at Platteville when I was there. Like they got recruited before I got there, but the coaches would say like, yeah, this kid just showed up on a junior visit day. We didn't know who he was, and we kept in contact with him. And hey, now look, he's a 2-time All-American. Awesome. Like that's not going to happen at some little liberal arts school in small town with Michigan,
Yep.
Iowa. Like those guys are busting their. Oh, did I lose you?
I got you on the voice. Lost the video
Okay.
for a sec there. Yeah, but I still hear you.
I don't know what happened, but yeah, those guys they're going all over the place, just scraping every single school that they know to try to find guys.
Absolutely, man. And I guess I'll leave you with this one before I let you go. What's next for you? Are there any big plans on the horizon as far as you and your coverage for D3 football in the next couple of years, or is it just a lot of, like you say, refining and continuing to provide that coverage and that insight?
Oh, I've got so many ideas that I've got
Good.
half baked in my brain. I don't know that I'll be doing a podcast or anything like that. Just I don't have the technical ability to do it,
That's
but
fair.
I'm gonna keep doing my ratings. I do end of season awards just to get something different out there for individual awards. I call it analytical All American teams.
Yep.
But other things I want to do analytically, yeah, I mean they're all half baked at this point. But I got stuff. But I'm focused on. I'm a high school coach too, and that starts up in June here. So
That's awesome.
that's what I'm focusing on for this summer. I'm pretty much done with what I'm going to do on the D3 football side. Now I'm focusing on Iowa high school football.
Hell yeah. Sweet, man. Absolutely. I'm excited to watch and continue to follow on with your coverage. Good luck with the high school season, and like I said, you're not going to be starting a podcast anytime soon. You got an open invite on this one, though. I appreciate you coming on and chatting.
Sounds great. All right, thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely.
Talk to you later.
Have a good night.